What do we know about the effectiveness of different psychedelics, like ayahuasca versus psilocybin versus LSD? Like, what are the trade-offs and benefits of having the really fast blast off and the really intense mystical experience versus a longer psychedelic trip, but has the peaks and troughs are less intense? Like, do we know sort of what the trade-offs, what the positives are for these different
Um,
treatments? Is it very individual? I mean, I'm assuming it's very individual, but
I think so. I mean, I think that in our so there's a difference. There's psycholytic therapy and psychedelic therapy. Psycholytic therapy was done more kind of in Europe, and it was done more when psychedelic therapy started to be explored. It was like in the 50s. There was loads of work done in the 50s and 60s before it became illegal. So psycholytic work was done with lower doses, but more therapy and more sessions.
right.
Um, so there's a really amazing book called Therapy with Substance by Frederica Meckel Fisher, and she really clearly describes a psycholytic approach. I think it's Samuel Vidmer was the kind of like the guy that kind of really experimented with it. Um, and then in America there was a psychedelic, so that was the European approach, and then in America it was more psychedelic, which is a really high, like a one-off, really high dose. And I think they both have their place. I think ideally it would be a mix for one person. Like I can think of like there are certain times when a really strong blast through like is going to be great, but you probably don't want to do that many times. Or maybe people do, but it's intense. It takes a lot of preparation. It takes a lot of integrating afterwards, and
Yes.
it's a lot of courage. And the psycholytic approach was um, kind of little and often a more gradual approach. And I think so. Frederica was working with MDMA, and a combination of MDMA and therapy, group therapy, looked like it was really powerful for people. So yeah, different people, different needs. I mean, so iboga, which is one that lasts about 3 days.
Yeah.
This is amazing for people who have an addiction to heroin or other addictions. They can withdraw from the addiction whilst they're going through the journey, and often have these very powerful experiences of life review, where they, through the course of the trip, and obviously this is something to never ever 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 do apart from with the most experienced team, because there are risks, cardiac risks, and it's also just an unbelievably, I mean, I've never done it, but I hear unbelievably intense experience. But
Yeah.
people can, I think for people with an addiction, iboga seems to be clearly like the one to try if you can.
Yeah, I've been looking this up. This has always been really interesting to me as well, because for things like depression and anxiety, it can be quite intuitive why increasing plasticity in the brain, getting to the root of an emotional issue, and then sort of talking it through, that's kind of intuitive why that might help.
Mm,
It's giving depression, I think, the respect it deserves as like a complex disorder.
mm,
But something like addiction is like an interesting one, because it's not necessarily intuitive why taking a psychedelic would, because like I would have a very neuropsychological view of addiction. Like, you have rewiring of your dopamine circuits that are reinforced to crave this thing. It's it's not maybe intuitive why taking a psychedelic would be so effective in addiction, but I was looking this up recently, and the percentages are crazy. Like, people with very serious heroin addictions, some like between 60 and 75% of them will be still quit after 6 months from an ibogaine treatment. Of course, those numbers vary, but that's crazy to me. That's amazing. It sort of seems criminal to me why that's not available. And I was gonna say this to you as well, is that, like, are you as pissed off as I am that governments and organizations and institutions in general are not listening to the data here, that this helps people? Like,
yeah.
people really need these treatments. The data is overwhelming that it's extremely beneficial for a range of conditions. We recently had MDMA rejected as a PTSD therapy by the FDA. That was very surprising for, I think, a lot of people in the psychedelic community. Do you can you understand this? Because it doesn't really make sense to me. There seems to be such clear evidence that this is highly effective for people that badly need it. Yet there
Mm.
seems to be obstacle after obstacle, hurdle after hurdle, some sort of institutional not acceptance of this data. Like, how do you think about this? It's very frustrating for me.
It is very frustrating. I share your frustrations, but also I think probably my answer to this is it's probably quite a kind of depressing answer if I'm to be honest about it. I feel that there are so many ways that certainly like governing systems that I grew up trusting and feeling that living in a democracy, and I felt like America and the UK, we lived in these democratic um, societies that were looking out for our well-being. I grew up with that kind of belief, and I think I've changed I don't have that belief anymore, and there are so many ways that just like investing money in young children and uh, there are so many ways that it is so much evidence to show that
Yeah.
if you do A or B or C, it will have incredibly powerful outcomes on people. Like, not even about healing psychological distress, which is what psychedelics are about, but preventing them. There are so many ways that decisions from our governments about allocation of resources and funds could I mean, we only need to look and see that like Elon Musk could end world hunger and chooses not to do that. I mean, there is there is a shift that's happened in me of understanding that our grassroots community networks we are going to have to do this. We're going to have to take care of ourselves and each other because I don't trust governing systems to have our best
Right.
interests at heart anymore. So I'm thinking much more around like localized care structures and networks of support. And obviously with psychedelics, it's like unfortunate. The heartbreaking thing about that is that they're such powerful tools, but we can't, because I do a lot of work around kind of community organizing of like networks of care. And I would love to include psychedelics, but we just can't because the risks of people, like if people were to sit for each other, for example, um, the risks if somebody got found out are so horrendous. I heard from someone that was doing a psychedelic therapy training that they had a lecture recently from someone who was a underground therapist. They gave somebody mushrooms. They've just come out of prison. It's like
It's
the
actually
weird.
barbaric.
It's absolutely barbaric to be incarcerating people for this kind of thing. So
Yeah.
because the system is the way it is, I feel like breath work, which is obviously legal and still you can have psychedelic effects, and certain other approaches are the ones we use in our community. And basically, I'm pissed off too. I'm like, why can't we use the really strong ones?
Yeah. It's
I'm
absurd.
I've almost given up on like thinking about the organizational processes. I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna not worry about that, and I'm just gonna do what I can for my own community, find the tools that we can use, and there are still ways of changing consciousness, even if we can't use plant medicines.
Right. The one that I thought was ironic in just the most cruel way is that I just finished watching a documentary on the Vietnam War. So, like, the US basically sent a bunch of their young soldiers to Vietnam to fight like a political war. Like, it was purely like political. They lied to the whole country. They lied to the soldiers who were there. A bunch of them, a lot of them died. A lot of them came back with PTSD, obviously, which is the most natural human response to being in that sort of environment that they were placed into and lied to about. And then there's all this scientific data that we actually have a really effective cure for PTSD, and it's being rejected. So they lied to them. They made them all go over. They all came back with this psychiatric condition, which really harms their life. And there's this whole thing around like homeless veterans and then just being forgotten. And we have a treatment, like we have something that really, really works. And then I get so frustrated at all of these crazy FDA reasons of why this was rejected. Like in the study, they forgot to mention that MDMA causes euphoria. And it's like that everyone knows that. Like that's a crazy rejection criteria. Like you have an effective treatment here. It's it's honestly too strange that at times I've gone down these conspiratorial rabbit holes because I'm like, it doesn't make sense. Like now I'm like, is there a big alcohol lobby or something that is preventing this? A big cigarette lobby because we know America is so influenced by these lobbying. Like, are these big institutional industries of like cigarettes, tobacco, alcohol, because we know that like people take psychedelics, they don't drink as much, they don't smoke as much. It's one of the best ways that people can quit smoking.
Yeah.
So if you were big tobacco right now, you would be seriously lobbying against psychedelics, and that's slightly conspiratorial, but also I'm like slightly like it doesn't make sense otherwise. Like they're so effective. There's so much data, and yet the world is so slow to adopt them. It doesn't really make any sense to me.
That's so interesting to think about the lobbies. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that approach before, but yeah, I like that would be, it would not surprise me if that were a factor.
The Giant Shoulder mission is to explore radical ideas in biology, neuroscience, and consciousness, and elevate those stories to the highest possible level while keeping them accessible to everyone. If this interests you and you want to support independent science, then please consider subscribing to the Clips channel. Check out our 26 Neuroscience book. You can download it for free